And one of the Go-Go's, Gina Schock, actually went to my high school. So I just thought that was fun. But the whole premise for Murder and Go-Go's, which features crime fiction inspired by their music, I just thought that was a very fun premise. Can you tell us about the story you wrote?
Sure. The premise came from Holly West, the editor. She's a big fan of the Go-Go's. We've had in the mystery community some of these anthologies based around song titles by certain artists. It's a fun way to get a broad range of crime stories around a very loose theme, because you don't write the stories about any of the songs. You don't really use the songs as characters. If you just use the title, then they're not stories about these musicians, but they're loosely categorized together. It's a fun thing. And I think Holly had a lot of fun with eliciting the stories and finding a balance between the stories that are in it. The story that I wrote, I have to admit that I had already written before this anthology came up. It was a story that I had written quite a long time ago, actually. I think maybe in 2007 or 8 when I was studying writing at a university here in Chicago, Roosevelt University, where I got my MFA in creative writing. And I had written this story and sent it out to magazines, as you do, and it never found the right home. It got rejected. When I started writing novels, I kind of fell away from writing a lot of short stories as I had been doing. I'd love to get back to it, actually. And it sort of just stayed on my hard drive for a long time. When Holly asked me if I wanted to be in the anthology, first of all, she gave me first dibs on whichever song title I wanted, which, I mean, when somebody gives you first dibs, you kind of have to take them up on that, I think. So I said, I want Our Lips Are Sealed. I went back to the story and revised it, made it exactly what it should have been. I think I shortened it a little. I think I nipped and tucked here and there. And I didn't have to change very much. The title worked for the story. It was already. And when I sent it to her, I said, this is what I have to offer. I haven't written a new short story in a while. If you don't love it, you don't have to take it. And she loved it and made it the first story in the book, which is sort of a pole position, the first thing that the readers pick up to see if they want to buy the book. So it was very flattering and also, really kind of cool to have a story that never found its right place, find its right place in a book like this.
Kind of kismet.
Absolutely.
Have you ever considered writing a series? Most of yours are all standalones.
Yeah, all of my books so far are standalones, although my second book, Little Pretty Things, I conceived that book as a series starter originally. And then I wrote it, turned it into my editor. The next thing you do is start writing the next book, right? I did not start writing Little Pretty Things too. I started something, went back into the quote unquote the drawer and dug out my very first novel manuscript and started revising that. And that became my third book, The Day I Died. When I was planning Little Pretty Things, which is a story about a young woman, she's about 10 years out of high school. She went to college, but then had to quit after one semester because her dad died. Financially, it wasn't possible for her to stay and she needed to be back home with her mom. So she's got like just enough taste of this other life that she should have maybe lived. But when she comes back, what she does for a living is she cleans this roadside motel, not very well, as she admits in the story. When I wrote that book, I had all these notes about what was Juliet Townsend going to be a book from now, 2 books from now, 3 books from now. What were the other jobs that she could have over time, maybe working up towards something that she wanted. And I made her younger than I would normally, my characters. I made her a little more naive than I would have made her otherwise because I wanted to give her room to grow. And then I didn't write any more Juliet stories. There are a couple of serious readers in the mystery community who are very mad at me that I never took Juliet back up and wrote these other books. So you never know. Maybe one of these days I'll write some more Juliet stories. I love standalones, though. I love series books. There are many series that I love as a reader. What I really love is a book that tells the whole story between this one set of covers. It just feels like a story that can go for broke, that doesn't have to save anything back. It doesn't have to save growth for another book or another character. And I'm also a little OCD when it comes to reading things in order. So series books thwart me trying to be a obsessive reader. If I read a second book instead of a first, it's a tragedy.
I feel the same way.
As Hank Philippi Ryan said, she liked standalones because anybody could get killed and anybody could be the bad guy because
Absolutely.
they don't have a history and they don't have a future.
I love that answer. Now I'm going to steal it from Hank. Thank you, Hank.
Lori, we really appreciate your taking the time with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Before we let you go, though, we'd like to know if you're working on anything new, when next Lori Rader-Day book is going to come out.
I absolutely am. I am working on revisions right now on what would be my next, I think it's early summer 2021, I think is when this one is supposed to come out. Things might change with everything that's going on right now. It doesn't have a title, so I can't even tell you that. That's how early the stage is. It's my first historical, and it is set in 1941 in England. I have had to do a ton of research, which is not my normal process and not something I'm actually very patient with, but I've learned a great deal. In World War II, during the Blitz, when they were taking children out of London, eventually about 3 million people were moved out of London because of the Blitz, but 10 children were moved to Agatha Christie's house in South Devon, and they were there probably about a year, maybe a little bit over a year. The records are not really super clear about that. It was a private arrangement, so there are no official records about this. But Agatha Christie herself talks about this episode in her autobiography. She gives it about a paragraph and gives a couple of details. Other than that paragraph and a letter that one of the children wrote to Greenway House when she was an adult, there's been very little written about this episode. I discovered it in about a half sentence of information in the book, The Secret Notebooks of Agatha Christie. I don't know if you read that book. If you're an Agatha Christie fan, it's simultaneously really interesting and also really boring. So it's really good bedtime reading for a mystery writer. And I was reading it in bed one night and saw this little half sentence where it said, the child evacuees who stayed at Greenway House during World War II. And I sat up in bed and thought, well, I want to read that book. Bedknobs and Broomsticks at Agatha Christie's house. I would love to read that book. When I realized, of course, no one had written that book, I thought, well, maybe someday I will. So this is 6, 7 years, maybe more of me thinking someday maybe I'll write that story if no one else gets to it first. I mean, obviously World War II was many decades ago and no one has ever written it. So now I know why, because the research is rather difficult and the children were all under the age of 5. They had 2 hospital nurses that were supposed to be taking care of the children, and I have gotten those hospital nurses into all kinds of trouble.
That sounds fascinating. I can't wait to read that one.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
And no, it's something I had never heard about.
I hadn't either.
When I tell my mystery writing friends or readers about that book, I love the look they get on their faces when they get to the 10 children went to Agatha Christie's house. They feel the same way about it that I do. So,
Oh, they're probably so envious of you.
I know somebody who is, Sophie Hannah, when I told her about, I'd gotten the contract to actually write it. Finally, after all these years, HarperCollins gave me the chance to write this book, and I told Sophie about it. She came to speak at the conference that I run here in Chicago, Murder and Mayhem in Chicago. She was our headliner, and I told her about it finally, and she just looked at me, and Sophie Hannah was the one who wished that she'd gotten to it first. But you never know. You never know. Maybe she'll have her own chance. But when she hears that all the children are under the age of 5, she's probably going to back away smartly.
That sounds really great, and we will really, truly be waiting to read that. You mentioned that things are changing, and we have, of course, noticed that a lot of the publishing world has made a lot of adjustments because of the COVID-19 quarantine. What kind of surprised about is that a lot of publishing houses are delaying publication, when I think that's counterintuitive. I would think that they would move up publication because people are more at home and they need something to do.
I think some of it is the chain of businesses that produce paper books, especially perhaps. There's not a lot of guarantees which companies are open and which factories are running and how much paper we can expect to get from China. There's just a lot in the chain of all the mechanisms that have to work for a book to be produced. There are some unknowns right now, so I think they're just hoping that they delay things a little bit. They'll have a chance to catch up, get books into the bookstores or the warehouses where they should be, and things can be sort of normal for there. But, there's a lot of unknowns right now. I hope that people are reading. I mean, it's a good time to try to find comfort where we can find it. I know that I have reread a couple of my old favorite books. Maybe Alice in Wonderland is next. Trying to find reading that comforts me. Other people maybe are reading for different reasons. I know there was a pandemic book that someone was like, I am reading this. And I'm like, really? You're reading a pandemic book? Do what you got to do.
I didn't think of the actual production of the books themselves. I was thinking more along the lines of like ebooks and Kindle and audio. I actually listened to the audio for The Lucky One.
Did you like the audiobook?
I did, but I have to say, back and forth with the texting or emails, that was hard to follow on the audio. I have to say that.
I did not think of that. I added the conversations. They were not early. The crowdsourcing aspect of the book was kind of a late addition that I'm very happy with, but I didn't think of it from the audiobook from that angle. I think you're probably right. It's probably easier to follow when it's on the page.
You can't think of every contingencies. It didn't really take away from the story.
Well, there will be no texting in my next book. Agatha Christie's house doesn't have Wi-Fi.
Good.
Lori, can you give us your website so our listeners can find you in your books?
Sure. I'm at www.LoriRader-Day, no hyphen in this case, .com. And then I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And also Pinterest. I know we don't use Pinterest that much anymore, but I've been keeping a board for all my Agatha Christie research. And so that's kind of a fun place to visit these days.
Love Pinterest.
I do too. Lori, we thank you so much for taking time to talk with us.
Not a problem.
And we wish you all the best with your writing. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you next year at Malice.
Well, I hope I can see all of the Malice people next year at Malice. We deserve Malice next year.
Yes, we do. Well, Lori, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, ladies. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you.
And you too. Thanks, Lori.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I have to say, I really feel that the title of this book was very appropriate because deciding who the lucky one is kind of the question of the book. Is it facetious? Is it, oh, she's the lucky one that she survived, that she was kidnapped and then came out of it? There's quite a few people that you wonder, are they the lucky one in this book? So I thought that Lori did a really good job of the name of this book. Yeah, how lucky was she?
I really like the character development in this story. There's a lot going on, especially a standalone book. Lori does a great job of telling you the story of Alice Fine and Merrily Cruz. They're women of about the same age, give or take a few years. It goes back and forth between the two, but you have a very good idea of their personalities, and then even the people around them, Merrily's mother, Alice's father. I just was very impressed with these people and getting to know them.
I have to say that the characters of Alice Fine and Merrily Cruz, it was almost like a dual protagonist book. There wasn't one that was focused on more than the other. I really enjoyed the way the story was told, that you got little bits of Merrily's story and then you got little bits of Alice's story, and you didn't realize how much in the end they were going to intertwine.
That's one thing that was good about this book, is the way Lori wove the story around so that it did all come in and mesh together at the end. It was very cleverly done.
Oh, I can't agree more. I was going to say wrapped around each other.
Yeah. When we interviewed her, we asked her to tell the story of how this came to be. But I think there's another interesting question that kind of arose for myself as I was reading this. You hear all the time that children have been kidnapped, and then sometimes they get rescued. Well, this is the whole story of what happens to one of those after they've been rescued. Because the news doesn't focus on that anymore. The news cares about the recovery and what happens to the perpetrator. But this is the life afterwards, what that person does to cope. And so I thought that was very interesting.
Well, my only criticism would be, how would somebody who was that young when she was kidnapped recognize the man who kidnapped her, who has also aged that 30 years? To me, it was a little bit beyond belief.
Traumatic things stick with you. I don't have a lot of memories from that time, but I do have like flashes of memories. And that was something very traumatic. So I don't know.
Well, it seemed to me also that Lori explained in Alice's case that her family, her father and her mother for that matter, kept the narrative going throughout her growing up time.
Well, her father especially. Her mother was very standoffish towards her whole life, which was part of her angst as she grew up, that her mother never really loved her.
So I guess if you're constantly reminded of a situation, then it cements it in your memory more.
Because if you tell yourself a story enough, you think you have a memory of it, even though you're just being told a story.
False memory. I did enjoy Jubilee and Lillian. Those were the two characters in the whole book I enjoyed the most.
I thought another interesting aspect of the book was the whole social media crowd